Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being with us in this second webinar of the European project MDNet. MDNet is a project co-financed by the European Regional Development Fund. The objective of the project is to impulse Mediterranean diet around the world. The project is coordinated by several organizations from different Mediterranean countries. Well, you can find more information about the project in the website and also in the social media. We would like to thank Professor Filipe Themudo Barata to be our guest speaker. He's a full professor at the University of Évora, Portugal. Also, he's a shareholder of the UNESCO Chair on Intangible Heritage and Traditional Know-how Linking Heritage. He has done dozens of conferences and theses, also produced books and papers regarding the same issues, history of the Mediterranean and heritage. During his presentation, you can send your questions via chat. He will try to answer them right after. This webinar is being recorded and will be available in the MDNet YouTube channel. I don't want to take more time. I will give the stage to Professor Barata, who will share with us his view regarding how this pandemic crisis offer the opportunity to rebuild our landscape and fight for a common future, and also how the Mediterranean diet could be a tool for a sustainable economic development. Well, it's your time, Professor.
Thank you, Manuel. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. I think some of you perhaps have, we have some moments we have seen in Faro. If you want, this is the second part of the Faro session. About the pandemic, I know nothing about it except the fact that I'm at home, as most of you perhaps. But the title of my presentation has two things that I think it is important to underline. The first thing is this idea of Mediterranean, and still underline this idea of Mediterranean, that the Mediterranean diet is about. And the second part of my title was to think about our common future. And I like to remember that in this Brundtland report, where for the first time we have talked about sustainable development, it is there in this time. And the interesting part is in the end of this report is a beautiful report. Brundtland was and this time the Prime Minister of Norway that was the president of this commission. And the common endeavor she proposed was exactly these things: managing the commons, and think about peace, security, development, and the environment. And I think we have forgotten this. In the recent years, in fact, we have closed our eyes what is going on around us. For instance, in the Mediterranean, we have allowed the destruction of our landscapes, the erosion, the deforestation, the agriculture practices have transformed our landscapes all over the Mediterranean. We have allowed, of course, something that everybody knows about and talk about, this climate changing, climate changes. By the way, this graphic is about a European project that deals with the Mediterranean, and we can see how the temperature has grown 1.5 degrees the last years. And also, we have forgotten what sustainable development is, and they talk in the 87. In fact, today we use the word sustainable development in a very different way. A big enterprise is sustainable when she presents profits. It was not exactly the same thing then they present this in 87. In fact, in 87, when they talk about sustainable development, they say two things. It is the importance of the importance of to let the earth better than we receive it, and to share the profits among the communities where the investments should be done. Very different from what we are talking about nowadays, sustainable development is. And so today comes this ugly thing, this coronavirus, and what we should do in the future. And for instance, with the Mediterranean diet. And this is the most important thing that I can say and I can think about. It is what to do with this ICH, with the intangible cultural heritage, where and the Mediterranean diet is a very nice example, as I will try to prove it. What are we going to do? To give up about our intangible cultural heritage? It is impossible. Just pretend that this virus period doesn't exist. It is impossible also, because I'd like to remember from more than 100 years that we have not knew a pandemic such like this. And like to remember, I'm an old guy, but my father never saw something like this. He died many years ago, 20 years ago. He never lived and experienced such an experience like this. So it is important to think about new path. And this is what in the next 15 minutes I'd like to talk about. Look, perhaps the more important thing is this. When we think about the Mediterranean diet, this is not, as it was more in the past, a health and a food landmark. In fact, Mediterranean diet is a cultural and global brand. It is interesting to visit here and then the UNESCO process when it was presented some years ago. Mediterranean diet doesn't talk about tomatoes or carrots or rice or fish. What the Mediterranean diet means is crops, harvesting, picking, fishing, animal husbandry, conservation, processing, cooking, and particularly sharing and consuming the cuisine. And it is at the table that the spoken word play a major role in describing, transmitting, enjoying, and celebrating the element. So perhaps we are not only not enlarging the concept, but we are just make it poorer if we keep on going just to talk about food in this context. So perhaps besides to talk about these elements, perhaps the interesting part is to talk about a way of life, to talk about our fishing and agricultural practices, even the objects, the memories of the Mediterranean, and they are beautiful. And I have, in the end, I can provide some bibliography about this, some collective perceptions of time, and much more. This image also, it's an attempt to explain what I'm talking about, the way of life. The second thing that I'd like to emphasize, perhaps it is a good idea. Okay, I'm a historian, I know, and perhaps this idea of the Mediterranean history pushed me to advise everybody to know something about the Mediterranean history, because it is the interesting part. It is this heritage, from my point of view, that somehow that built our concept of a way of life that Mediterranean diet talk about. The other part means that and this is from my point of view is an interesting thing, that around the concept of Mediterranean diet, what kind of economy and especially jobs we can talk about, and what kind of developments we can find it out. And so it comes the the first thing that, from my point of view, it is important is to underline this idea. But we are talking about jobs and business. There is some criteria to look at it. Okay, I tried to simplify something that I present in Faro, and the interesting part from my point of view of this table I'd like to show to you, it was this from my point of view left side. I think we see it all in the left side column. We are talking about in this Mediterranean diet, the project and the jobs and the economy should be cultural anchoring to open networked people, to innovation mix, new business models, and sharing values. Look, this is a very interesting idea that happened during even this coronavirus pandemic times. In all of our societies, with we knew that the old people were the more fragile groups. And the interesting part is how we are concerned about the situations where our older people, the people with more age, they are the groups that are is more at risk. And let me just tell a story about a student I have here studying with me at Evora, and this concern, this idea of different idea of links between people. I have a student that should be married in July, and the point is she's studying here with me in Evora, and should be married in July, and she was preparing to go to his country. It is a country, an Arabic country in the Mediterranean, and she was preparing to go to marry, and she gave up of his travel and of his marriage. Why? Because she told me, if I return to my house, my first concern is I can put in danger my father's, and especially my grandfather's. And so she gave up to do so. This is what I call innovation mix. This is what I call the keep the link between generations. So let me just talk about the project I have, and I participated a couple of years ago, and I think it's very linked to the idea of the things that I'm trying to propose to you. A couple of years ago, I participated in the project, especially the methodologies they developed for looking for jobs, looking for a new economy. Was very, very interesting. I was inside the project, and I participated in the project. It was very interesting. The idea was this one. The idea was the first day they gather a group of specialists or people that work in heritage, and during one day we should find out and think about it was in fact 10 tables, if I remember well, of 6 tables with 10 persons, something like that. And each table should think about a group of projects. In the end of the day, someone of each table should present the project we think could be interesting to develop and to think about. Then comes a group of economists to think about this economy profitable, if they have the capacity to be economic project with good results. Then they opened the calls, and the calls were very interesting, because the calls, it was between people with good skills, especially in new technologies, but also they should be also to people with more than 60 years. And each group of them should be the enterprise chosen should have one of till the 35, and to be partnered for the other one with more than 60 years. And I was a member of I should follow up one of the project just to see if they were accomplishing the objectives that they have been financed during 1 year. Here it is a very interesting thing for the jobs of the future. And this is something that this should be our concern, because what we know about well, this year, the future of this year, we are talking about 2020, should be a concern for us. Here it is why I prefer not just to think about this, our common future in the long run, but why I prefer to think about and to talk about our common future this year after this pandemic situation. So we can start. And just for those who want to know about something about the bibliography and so on, if you go to the website of the chair, you can find this book, if you want, where I try to think about this problem much more in the long run than in the short term. But today I prefer, I've chosen to speak about this year in the next year, because you are facing a very difficult situation. And where I speak about inclusive policies, cultural anchor, permanent negotiation, and the democratic process. Thank you very much. Okay, I know it was 16 minutes, but we have more time to speak and to talk. Manuel, I'm ready.
Thanks so much for your presentation. We have a question, and they are asking, how do you think this current situation can affect our Mediterranean lifestyle?
Look, yeah, can I answer now? Okay, look, the way of life I'm talking about, especially those in the Mediterranean world, and it is the way of life of proximity. I mean, people with people, not with the system we are talking about. This one, I mean, this video and long distance systems. And the important thing it is in this process is the following: because we are losing this proximity practices, we are losing also our capability to understand the other. And if you look at our history was the history of in the Mediterranean. What we have more is, as I told in Faro, is diversity, is differences, but also the capability to manage our differences and to manage our diversities. But this is done with proximity. I mean, to know the other, to know, no matter if to know the other personally, no matter, because it is the base to understand it. And the important danger that we have now is to lose these connections, because the basis of this capability to manage our differences, our diversities, it was the distance, the capacity to be close to the others. Even with the war, even with the discussion, even during the opposition. But this is essentially to be close to them. This is the most big danger I think we have now. Huh? The interesting part, look, let me just tell you a small story. Look, the interesting part, no matter if I am in Sicily or in Tunis, no matter. The interesting part is I sit at the table and I'm a Christian in this sense, and I drink wine. But I don't. But it is important that the other see me to drink wine, and I see the other not to drink the wine. You understand this? It is important to understand this different diversity. It is important to understand that we are different, but we can nevertheless to speak and to understand and to manage our differences. This is the important part. Okay.
Okay. There is another question. It's asking about, do you think this situation will change our mentality? Now the people seems to be more aware about sustainability. For example, they value more the local products, the consumption of local products to preserve and guarantee our food self-supply. What do you think? This will change our behavior, this
You know,
pandemic?
during the next, I don't know. My suspicion is most of us, in our society, we don't like to preserve our memories. We forget easily, very
Mhm,
easily.
mhm,
And I'm not sure. Well, one thing I know, in 1 year when the vaccine appears, we want to forget it at least during 1 year. Perhaps in the more long run, perhaps we can appreciate better that perhaps there is things that we have forgotten. It was a very bad idea. We have export our capability of. Look, I have a huge collection of elephants at home. Huh? And they are much easier when I buy than in China. Much easier because they are cheaper. But perhaps now it is better to understand that perhaps to export our capability to produce everything, it was not a very good idea. And so perhaps it was a good idea to help and to push and to do some efforts to produce our things here. And with this perception, perhaps there is a field to make our intangible heritage practices growing. Perhaps that could be an interesting idea.
Okay. There is another question from Carmela, Felipe.
Yeah.
She's asking, during your presentation, you suggest pilot processes for local initiatives. Don't you think they are too small against the global economy interest? How? From where can we start to change the micro process?
Yeah, this is an interesting point. Look, I'm not sure if they are so if they are so weak facing the global economy. I don't have the numbers here. I don't have the numbers here, but I have a couple of them. Then perhaps it could be interesting to think about. The GDP in Europe, the average GDP in Europe for the cultural and the creative industries, it was a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, it was 4%. In the United States, for more or less the same time, it was 7%. According to the European reports, the sector that will grow in terms of jobs, it should be in this sector, in the creative cultural industry. It was one of the sectors that is, because they are linked to the tourism, of course. So I'm not sure they were so weak according these numbers of the reports that I don't have now it by heart. But let me tell you something. One of the things that I know, tourism is the fourth industry in the world. Tourism. And today, tourism is not only, and it is far from that. linked to the tourism now. It's a group of huge number of industries, cultural and performing arts and cultural and creative industries that are very, very important. And it is, by the way, one of the sectors that are suffering more nowadays. Not only the tourism, but also these industries. And it is interesting to see in the end of the day, I mean, in the end of the pandemic, which of these sectors has suffered more. Because perhaps there it was of, we understand also how they were an important sector that most of our governments have forgotten these sectors. It is interesting to see the results in the end. But no, I don't think they were too small facing the global, because they are part of this global economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have another last two questions. One is from Luis Ferreira. He's saying first, thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for the presentation. And he is saying, a Mediterranean diet is a way of life, but the huge part of the food comes from the industrial and destructive farming model. How can we transform food system to be in line with this way of life and become sustainable in the line you said?
Yes, look, it is interesting, because the first thing I could say is we have done a lot of mistakes there. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, it is an interesting. If it allow me just to show my historian side, because for this thing it is important. During the pandemic, in the Black Peace of the 14th century, at the beginning of the century, Portuguese has begun to have food problems. And you know where was the most rich regions to buy cereals? Exactly in Sicily. All the Europeans went to Sicily to buy the cereals there. And even in the south, the northern reef of the Mediterranean, they were important producers of this. Most of our agriculture skills, we have export them, and there is a very interesting group of projects nowadays to evaluate and measure the familiar agriculture where the traditional know-how is still used. They are much more. They are now much more and much more important than in the past. But we have abandoned them most of the time. And we have forgotten also one another thing. If we try to do some demographic studies now, we can see that in our shores, most of people that are living there, they have different skills concerning agriculture than compare with the traditional image and representation we have of these producers in the past. So perhaps to support the new producers that are in the field, that are in the working this land, perhaps could be an interesting idea. And then perhaps it is interesting also, the Mediterranean diet could get different elements, different products, different practices, different objects, different changing a little bit his way of life with the people that are coming for the shores of the Mediterranean, because they don't live the shores of the Mediterranean, because they will do the agriculture in a different way, and perhaps we are forgetting this also.
Thanks so much. Another question is asking, Francesca is asking, do you think Mediterranean lifestyle will get stronger by this pandemic?
I don't know, but one thing I'm sure, this I can say, I hope so. I hope so. No, look, I think this, we understand now at least one interesting, from a sociological point of view, we understand one interesting thing. Look, with my age, it is not very, very heavy for me to support the burden to be close at home. But one thing we understand is how nice it is to be in the end of the day, after the work, to sharing with a group of friends and family, and talk with the others. This idea to sharing, this idea to sharing around the table, this idea of sharing memories, this idea of sharing objects, this idea of sharing spaces, I think we're going to give a value that perhaps in the past we have forgotten there was.
Yeah. Actually, Professor, I just come to my mind, and I was reading some newspaper articles, especially from the north of Europe,
Yeah.
blaming the Sanos the reason why the high numbers of cases in Italy and Spain was because our closeness, this culture, the social way that we have to kiss each other, to be too close to each other, to have a very large group of people around. And they were, I don't know, for my mind, I was just reading this, they say, oh, are we going to change this, the way that we relate here in the Mediterranean? Are we going to stop kissing, being close in groups and families? I was just wondering now that you're talking about, let us hope
during 1 year, perhaps, I think. But no, this from look, from beside what I think it is the most dangerous thing from my point of view is if we are losing the sense that the Mediterranean, it is interesting not only by its features of climate, of physical geographical things, but especially because we have been able look, it is important to, when I talk about memories, it is important to understand the following. This idea to be in the space, in the Mediterranean, with so many differences, with so many this cost us a lot of death, a lot of blood, a lot of wars. And at the end of these thousands of years, we managed to know how to deal with it, how to manage and how to deal with this diverse. And when I talk about the Mediterranean, diverse people, with the diverse, not only religions, not only costume, everything. And there was this memory. It is important to keep it because the world needs to understand that it is possible and it is not mandatory to have this all over the world. But in the Mediterranean, we have learned that, and we can teach that.
I don't know, Jorge Manuel Fernandez, if you can listen me, can you open your micro and perhaps you can ask your question directly to the Professor Barata? Because I'm not clear if I understood your question, Jorge. Jorge Manuel Fernandez, can you open your micro? Yes, he's not able to open, but Carmela, can you do it? Can you open your micro and ask your question directly?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Go ahead, Carmela, with your question.
I can, yes.
Okay. It's a very simple question. Do you think, Filipe, that it can be an opportunity for our Mediterranean diet areas that are less populated, rural areas, to offer a new type of tourism for after this situation of pandemic, which demonstrates the difficulty of mass tourism?
Look, Carmela, this is because I think that this is why I decided to change the end of this presentation, because what I think it is was more important, it was this idea of a project that has a huge impact in this sense, exactly what you are talking about. I mean, this last PowerPoint presentation where I present what kind of methodology to approach this new economy that we could develop there in the Mediterranean, because the environment, I mean, the personal environment and so on, it is perhaps possible to do so. And I, exactly because of, to answer your question, because of that I have changed, because my first approach was much more theoretical, and when I decided to present with this, it is exactly to try to answer to these jobs, to these changes that we could push and we could use now. If there is a need, I could write something more in the kind of small report, or in a meeting with the project, much more meeting. I mean, but it's exactly because of that I have do this presentation about the methodology to approach this kind of projects.
Okay. Thanks so much, Professor. The time is over, but there is another question that I think is interesting.
I have time, I still close at home. I have time.
Yeah, everybody's close at home. Well, Jose Ramon, I don't know, Jose Ramon, if you listen to me, if you would like to ask your question directly, if you want to open your micro, if not, you can go ahead and read it. Jose Ramon Pelayo, he said, good afternoon. As a historian, do you think it will be a mistake if the European Union separate into two blocks? On the one hand, the northern countries, and on the other hand, the Mediterranean ones?
Wow, this is difficult to answer this one. Look, I must tell you I must confess, I'm a pro-European guy. I appreciate very much when I was young. I travel in Europe, hitchhiking all over Europe, and I know the first thing I know Europe, it was hitchhiking all over Europe with my long beards and long hair. So this is how I knew Europe. And the most bothersome thing was to have a piece of coin for each country. And I like very much the idea that I just need to use my euro. So I like this idea of euro. I like this idea of common values. I like this idea of democracy. I like this idea of we have to negotiate, so we must understand the other. I like these ideas, and I don't want to give up of them. These ideas I like. But I'm very angry also with the northern part of my Europe that they don't like. It is not only the south. They don't understand the south of the Mediterranean, and this bothered me a lot. The southern of the Mediterranean, not the southern countries, the southern of the Mediterranean, and this bothered me a lot. And this is why I work with organizations in the Arabic world, just to support these people that want that all the time migrating everywhere. The countries to the city, from the southern of Africa to the Europe. So this is why I help them, because, and also the Greeks have the same, more or less the same problem. I mean, I'm angry with them, but not only because the struggle between the north and southern of Europe, but also and especially because they don't understand our friends from the southern part. And why I say that? Because as I told you in Faro, they cut the Mediterranean project in two. The Mediterranean now in the European Union project, they are cut in two. I mean, I could not have a partner. I could have an associated partner, not a real partner of the South. I'm very angry about this kind of things. But I like very much my Europe. Yes,
And we need a stronger Europe. And we need a stronger Europe. Professor Filipe Barata, thanks so much for your presentation. I think we're still having some questions arriving, but I guess we will try to send it to you and then to answer in our website and social media.
Please do.
I don't want to keep this conference too long. I think a short should be a very good productive to make people to think and ponder about these ideas. And okay, we just want to invite everybody to join us in the project, to visit our website, to visit our social media. Next week, we will have another webinar focusing on the physical activity of the Mediterranean lifestyle. We will let you know by the website, by the social media. So far, well, we just want to thank Professor Barata. Thanks so much for your presentation. Also, I just reminded that this presentation has been recorded with the questions and answers and will be uploaded on the YouTube channel of the project.
Thank you very much. But those that have no time to be answered, please use my email and send me the question, because really I have time to answer now.
Okay, if you want it, it's just okay for you. We will write down your email.
Yeah. It's a good one.
Here in the chat, and we will share it with them. Is this okay for you?
Okay.
I don't know. Well, we will close this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank everybody for participating. Here's Professor Barata email. I don't know, it's Jorge, Manuel Fernandez, and Monica can send their questions directly to him. Thanks so much, Monica and Jorge Fernandez, and sorry for not be able to answer your questions now. Well, thanks so much, everybody, and see you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor.